If you've been taught that the early church was a unified group of people holding hands and singing Kumbaya, this session will challenge that view. The historical texts reveal a power struggle between Jerusalem, that's Peter and James, and the Gentile mission, Paul. It all begins in a city that was known for its luxury, its vice, and its diversity, Antioch. Section 1, the Antioch crucible. Acts chapter 11 tells us that Barnabas went to Tarsus, found Saul, Paul that is, and brought him to Antioch. So Acts chapter 11, verses 25 to 26, it says, "And he went out to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch." Historical context: Antioch on the Orontes. Antioch was the third largest city in the Roman Empire after Rome and Alexandria. It was the capital of the Roman province of Syria. It was a melting pot. Unlike Jerusalem, which was intensely Jewish, Antioch was a place where Greek, Syrian, Roman, and Jewish cultures collided. It is here, according to Acts chapter 11, verse 26, that the disciples were first called Christians, Christianoi. The suffix "ian" or "ian" is Latin. It means belonging to the party of. Just as the Herodians belonged to Herod, and the Christians were also seen as political partisans of this quote-unquote Christ. But the harmony in Antioch didn't last. We are about to look at one of the most tense moments in the entire Bible. It is often called the incident at Antioch. Section 2, the confrontation, Paul versus Peter. We have two accounts of this period. The one is the sanitized version in Acts chapter 15. The other is the raw eyewitness account of Galatians chapter 2. In Galatians chapter 2, Paul describes a scene where Peter, Cephas, comes to visit Antioch. At first, Peter eats with the Gentiles. This is a massive breach of Jewish kosher law, eating with quote-unquote unclean people, but Peter does it. Then, certain men from James arrive. James is the brother of Jesus and the leader of the Jerusalem church. When these men arrive, Peter gets scared, pulls back, he separates himself. So this is Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. It says, "But when Cephas came to Antioch, I resisted him to the face." So this is Paul speaking. And apparently he's bragging about confronting Peter. "Because he stood condemned," he says. "For before some people came from James, he ate with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy." This is shocking. Paul calls Peter, the quote-unquote the rock of the church, a hypocrite. He says Barnabas, his own partner, failed. The wow fact, DSS connection. What was the issue? Quote-unquote the works of the law. Paul uses this phrase repeatedly. For decades, scholars debated what this meant. Then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. In a scroll called 4QMMT, the halakhic letter found in Cave 4 at Qumran, we find the exact Hebrew equivalent of this phrase, Ma'aseh HaTorah, works of the law. The scroll lists regulations about purity, specifically about keeping liquids and foods pure, and separating from Gentiles, this proves that, quote unquote, the works of the law wasn't just about being good or obeying the law or following Torah. Rather, it was a technical term for the sectarian regulations that kept Jews separate from Gentiles. This is exactly what Peter and Paul were fighting about. The Jerusalem Council, Acts chapter 15 versus Galatians chapter 2. To solve this fight, they go to Jerusalem. This meeting is known as the Apostolic Council. This is approximately 48 or 49 AD. We must carefully compare the two reports of this meeting. Report A, Acts 15, the public decree. In Acts, the meeting is a public debate. Peter stands up and defends the Gentiles. James concludes with a compromise. He writes a letter telling Gentiles to abstain from 4 things. Actually, this is not really necessarily a compromise, but rather it is the initiation into the Torah. Any Jew, or excuse me, any Gentile that wanted to convert to Judaism was required to obey those 4 laws up until the finalization of what they call the Noahide laws. So in Acts, the meeting is a public debate. Acts chapter 15. So before we get into the nitty-gritty here, let's go to Acts chapter 15, and we'll read the whole, well, maybe not the whole chapter, but a good part of it. All right. Acts chapter 15, verse 1. Some men came down from Judea and taught the brothers, unless you are circumcised after the custom of Moses, you can't be saved. Just a little bit of background here. What is going on? What is the context? So at this point, Gentiles wanted in on the kingdom. They wanted part of the part of the blessings, if you will. Abrahamic blessings. So they wanted to get saved. And so in this instance, we have some people from Judea saying basically that the Gentiles had to get circumcised in order to get saved. Verse 2, therefore when Paul and Barnabas had no small discord and discussion with them, they appointed Paul, Barnabas, and some others to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. Okay. So before we get too far, let's go and compare that with what Paul himself said happened in Galatians chapter 2. So, in Galatians chapter 2, Paul himself wrote about this interaction, this council, the council at Jerusalem. Verse 1, he said, then after a period of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus also with me. I went up by revelation and laid before them the good news which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately before those who were respected, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And by the way, Titus was circumcised later. Okay, we got that as well. Verse 4, this was because of the false brothers secretly brought in, who stole in to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. To whom we gave no place in the way of subjection, not for an hour, that the truth of the good news might continue with you. Okay, so let's compare that with Acts chapter 15. So in Galatians chapter 1, Paul refers to his conversion. So Galatians chapter 1, he talks about how God, according to him, God chose him, and that he was a bearer of the gospel, and he he ended up going away for 3 years. After 3 years, I went to visit Peter in Jerusalem, stayed with him 15 days. And then after that, it says, in Galatians chapter 2, then after a period of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas. So this is the same event that we have here in Acts chapter 15. Some men came down from Judea and taught the brothers, unless you are circumcised after the custom of Moses, you can't be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas, there we have Paul and Barnabas, and had no small discord and discussion with them, they appointed Paul, Barnabas, and some others. So those others would include Titus, according to Paul's own account here. So he said in Galatians chapter 2, verse 1, he went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas. But in verse 2, he said that it was by revelation. Okay, so this is different than what we have in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, it says that they appointed Paul. So these would be members of the church, appointed Paul, Barnabas, and some others to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So according to Luke, Paul, it says nothing about a revelation. So according to Luke, Paul went to Jerusalem with Barnabas and Titus and some others because certain people from the church sent him there. It's like, okay, Paul, so you're having a dispute with these other Jews. They say that the Gentiles have to be circumcised. You're saying they don't have to be circumcised. So Paul, you need to go talk to the real. You need to go escalate this issue to Peter and James. You need to go ask them, because you don't have the authority basically to bring down the final word. You have to go to the top. Go to the leaders of the church, see what they have to say. So right away, notice how Paul spoke about this. He claimed that was all by revelation. Now, you know that Paul talks about revelation quite a bit in some of his epistles. Like, he got the gospel by revelation. It wasn't by anybody else. It was just by revelation, by the revelation of God. So that right there kind of throws a wrench into the letters of Paul, because if Luke said that Paul's trip to Jerusalem was because of other people who wanted him to go and escalate the issue to the real authority, and Paul claims that as a revelation, almost like he got this supernatural mystic experience by God again, and like God told me to go to Jerusalem. So that shows us how Paul spins things, right? We got the Paul spin on it. He spins it by saying, I went up by revelation. He says nothing about the church who sent him. And then he says, I lay before them the good news, that's the gospel, which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately before those who were respected, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, being Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. So this, of course, this is talking about, again, this is just proof that this is about the same event, this is about the same topic. So it's about the Gentiles. Titus was a Gentile who, was in this situation. Does he have to get circumcised or not in order to be saved? That is exactly the setting here in Acts chapter 15. We have these Gentiles. How do they get saved? Do they have to get circumcised or not? So, verse 4, Paul says, this was because of the false brothers secretly brought in In Acts, it says nothing about, it doesn't call them false brothers. It just says men came down from Judea. So it doesn't say false brothers. It talks about men from Judea. So what does this tell us? This tells us again how Paul viewed it, how Paul spun it. He spun it as false brothers. He immediately casts them like the false brother, whereas Luke does not do that. He just says, well, they said that you have to get circumcised in order to get saved. Paul, of course, the assumption is he doesn't believe that. But Paul puts it in a different light. Who stole in to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ. So he goes into this whole narrative again about liberty. That they might bring us into bondage, according to Paul. And then Paul, in verse 5, this is Galatians chapter 2, verse 5, he seems to be bragging here, like, to whom we gave no place in way of subjection, not for an hour, that the truth of the good news might continue with you. So it's like, well, we didn't give in to them at all. Verse 6, but from those who were reputed to be important, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. God doesn't show partiality to man. They, I say, who were respected, imparted nothing to me. But to the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the good news for the circumcised, even as Peter with the good news for the circumcised. Excuse me. So this is, so what's Paul is saying here, that he has been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, which means Gentiles. Peter was entrusted with the gospel to the Jews, the so-called the circumcised. So we know this because this is what they say here. They use this kind of terminology throughout the scriptures to refer to the Gentiles versus the Jews. So the so-called uncircumcised are the Gentiles, and the circumcised are the Jews.